So our theme for this month with the Village Vitality Health Challenge is about making good choices and setting goals and all of that sort of thing. It's a thing that people often do at this time of year, and so that's our theme for the month. How many of you have signed up for the Village Vitality Challenge? All right, yay! So if you haven't yet, it's not too late. You can go to our church website, and there will be a link there. And we have a Facebook group, and it's a monthly health challenge, something different every month. And we have a meeting on the first Sunday of the month where we discuss the challenge, and then we have things posted throughout the month to help encourage you along. And there's prizes for people who do the challenges and all sorts of fun stuff to do with that. Anyway, but tonight we're talking more about making choices and particularly the power of choice. So the first question for us is, why do you do what you do? Have you ever thought about that? Well, a lot of people don't think too much about the decisions they make. They just do what they do and they go on with it. And sometimes people even believe that they just, they don't even, it's just automatic. Things just happen automatically. They don't even have a choice. But in reality, we actually do have lots of choices. Oftentimes, we just don't think about how we make the choices, and sometimes we're not even aware that there is a process in making a choice. So tonight I want to introduce you to a general idea about how human beings work and how our mind works and how we make choices. So the first thing is the Bible tells us a little bit about how God made humans. And if you go back into the book of Genesis, you'll see several things, and we're not going to do a deep dive on the Bible study part of this, but just mostly as a reminder, I'm sure you've all read this before. What did God say when he was about to make man? He said, let us make man how? In our image. And so that means something about the process of how we make decisions, of how we live. God said that he gave the humans dominion over the earth and all of these things. So that's part of it. So we're made in the image of God. And then the next chapter tells us a little bit more. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, you may remember it says that God formed man from what? The dust of the ground, and then breathed into him the breath of life, and man became what? Anybody remember? Man became a living soul. Now there are some systems of philosophy and belief that think that our body is just a trap, and our soul is somehow trapped in our body until we're liberated and our soul can go free and we leave the body behind. Well, that's not at all a biblical idea of what human beings are. So we know from Scripture, and also we know this from our actual life, our experience, that human beings are a soul that has body, mind, spirit, all these things all together as one. And when we try to separate them out, it causes some problems for us. So with that as our foundation, I'm going to tell you a story that may or may not have actually happened. I can neither confirm nor deny if this is a true story. Imagine yourself working late in a job where you only work between 60 to 100 hours a week, and you're working overnight in the hospital, after spending all day in the clinic, and it's like 3 in the morning, and you come up to the nurse's station, and there they have chocolate cake. What happens inside our hypothetical person's mind when they walk up to the nurse's station at 3 in the morning? They haven't had anything to eat since probably 7 or 8 the night before. They've been working hard. Anybody want to hazard a guess what happens in your mind? You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Yeah. See, that actually is my favorite right there. It's like a German chocolate cake, I think, with all the layers and the coconut and frosting. And it's like, oh, that looks really good. I'm going to go half a piece. And so as I'm walking over to the nurse's station, of course, you don't want to offend the nurses when you're working in the hospital. That's the last thing you want to do. So what else happens inside my head right at that moment? Anybody want to guess? Yeah, there's that other voice in my head that says, you probably shouldn't be eating chocolate cake at 3 in the morning. Like, that's not really going to be good for you. And then the other voice says, but I'm hungry and I'm going to have to work a few more hours. I deserve it. And so all of a sudden, there's this little back and forth happening. Is anybody familiar with that sort of situation? I mean, maybe it's not chocolate cake at 3 a.m. at the nurse's station, but you all have been in a situation where part of you said, oh, I want to do this, and the other part's like, no, you shouldn't do that. And you start arguing with yourself. Yeah? Okay. So that's our scenario. Now we're going to try to graph out how did we get to that point, and then what happens when we make the decision of what we're going to do. Okay? So we start out with our thoughts and feelings as a core part of who we are, right? And so what are our thoughts? What are some categories or types of thoughts that people have?
How sweet this place is, they appreciate me.
Okay. So thinking good things about other people. Okay? That's wonderful. I would suggest that our thoughts include such things as our beliefs, our belief system, our doctrines, or things that we believe about life. Our thoughts, our memories are also thoughts, or at least they have some cognitive content typically, and our plans for the future are also thoughts, aren't they? So there's all sorts of, this is not a comprehensive list of all the kinds of thoughts that we have, but it's just to kind of give us an idea. Now, what about our feelings? Does anybody in here have feelings? Yeah, okay. At least 2 of you have feelings. That's wonderful. The rest of you, maybe you should have been here last night. Anyway, sorry. Last night was the depression recovery program, so if you don't know if you have feelings, you might be severely depressed and not even know what your feelings are. I'm not making any diagnosis, I'm just saying that's one possibility. Anyway, feelings would include things like feelings of love, of anger, or fear. And there are all sorts of other feelings, right? But is this a complete view of a human being? No, it's a good start on one, but it's not complete. So if we're going to extend this sort of description of our being in both directions, what else would we add? Well, I'm going to suggest that we would add our spirit, or the spiritual component, or spiritual part of our being, and we, of course, would recognize our body, or the flesh part of us, right? So these are all parts of us. They're not really separate parts. They're sort of intertwined and interconnected and overlapped in ways that we don't really fully understand. But at least in Western society, we tend to talk about these different parts as if they're separate. That kind of makes sense? So we're going to talk about them tonight as if they're separate for the sake of discussion, but recognizing they're not really completely separate. They're really kind of integrated. So now our spirit would include things like our conscience, our ability to reason, and worship. Those are kind of the spiritual parts of us, right? And then our body, or the flesh part of us, would react with things like pain. We feel pain as a bodily sensation. We could feel hunger. Is anybody here hungry right now? No. Was anybody hungry when they came in? I was. And now you're not. That's good. That's good. And it was an enjoyable process of going from being hungry to being not hungry. And those were fabulous. Wasn't that a fabulous meal? Did we say thank you to everybody? We did? Well, I just want to say thank you to the people who prepared the meal. That was wonderful. So we also could include lust here, and lust is kind of a general term for all sorts of desires of the flesh, right? And so here we have a little bit more of a complete view of our being. And so going back to our situation with the chocolate cake, what part of me is it that wants to eat the chocolate cake? One of these parts? Probably at least this much, right? Because I know it tastes good. I've eaten it before, and I know that there's that lust desire part that says, hey, chocolate cake is good. I want some of that, right? And which part of me is it that says, hey, it might not be the best choice to do that at 3 a.m.? Spirit. The spiritual part. My reason, maybe my conscience, some combination of reason and conscience saying, hey, this isn't really the best thing to do right now. Right? So we have this sort of tug of war inside of our own mind sometimes. And who is it that decides which part of me is going to actually get to follow through on making this decision? It's my power of choice. Right? And in the old days, it used to be called willpower. These days, a lot of people say they don't have any willpower, but the reality is we all have willpower. It's just, for many people, willpower has given up and handed over the reins, so to speak, to some other part of us. And it's just sitting there. It's there, we have it, but we're just not exercising it. And so sometimes different parts of us present different ideas or thoughts or possibilities, and our power of choice decides which way are we going to go with this. So here we go. Now suppose that I eat this piece of chocolate cake. So that's an action. My flesh says, hey, I want this. My willpower says, okay, go for it. So I grab a piece of chocolate cake and I sit down and I start eating. Like, oh, does it feel good? Yeah, it feels good. And it's like, oh yeah, it's like, oh, this is good stuff. And then typically what's going to happen probably about 5 or 10 minutes later? 5 or 10 minutes later, I'm going to start feeling like, oh, why did I do that? It's like, it's January 3, and already I broke my New Year's resolution to eat clean and healthy. And I start feeling bad because I let myself down I made the wrong choice, and maybe my sugar level spiked, and then it starts to drop off. And we could talk about what happens when you eat concentrated sugar and it spikes your blood sugar level, but then your insulin, and then you drop, and there's a whole other lecture on why that happens. But anyway, I'm going to move along here. So I start to feel bad in a little while. And what's that bad feeling? What do we call that? Is there a name for, when you did something wrong and you told yourself you shouldn't, but you did it anyway, and now you feel guilty. Guilty. All right. So did you know it's a common thing for people to feel guilty? Has anybody here never felt guilty? Okay. Nobody raised their hand, so everybody's smart enough to know you should feel guilty at some point in your life. So we've all felt guilty. The Apostle Paul wrote about this in Romans. If you read chapter 7, you remember Romans chapter 7, Paul says, I do things I don't want to do. I don't do things that I want to do. And then he kind of, like, if it wasn't the Apostle Paul, I would say it was right out heresy. But he said, it's not me, it's sin that lives in me. Like, how often would we let one of our kids get away with an excuse like that when they do something, when they directly disobey you, and you say, oh, Dad, it wasn't me, it was sin that lives in me? I don't know about that. I think maybe a good spanking might help get that sin out of you. I don't know. If we're allowed to do that, I don't know where we are now, but that was Paul's experience. He said, oh, wretched man that I am, who's going to deliver me from this? I don't want to be this way, and I can't help myself. We've all felt that at some point in life, right? And so this is what happens when we get into these cycles. And then that brings a question of why do we make bad choices like that? Why do we do the wrong things so often in life and get in that situation with the Apostle Paul where we find ourselves doing things that we don't even really want to do, but somehow we do them? Well, I'm going to suggest a series of reasons or motivations, and I divide them into primary reasons and secondary reasons why we make bad choices. So the first two primary reasons, self-gratification and self-exaltation. And these two things explain the reason for so much of our bad decisions, or we could call it sin. So much of the sin in the world, people just want something because they want to gratify themselves. It makes them feel good in some way, or they want to exalt themselves and make themselves look better, and they're proud of themselves, or they feel good about themselves, and they want to make themselves feel better by somehow putting other people down, so it makes them feel better. You could go right back to the war in heaven. Lucifer, where did sin start? The Bible tells us that he had pride and he lifted himself up. And then in the Garden of Eden, what happened? Eve was tempted to eat of the fruit. And what was the temptation? Oh, it'll make you like God. It will exalt you, and it's good to eat. It looks good. It'll taste good. So it was combined. The devil combined these two things into one temptation, and Eve fell for it. And then we've been falling for it ever since. Secondary reasons, I would put in pain. Have you ever noticed when people are in pain, sometimes they make bad choices? And it's like the cycle gets kind of worse and worse. You ever notice that? You ever tried to rescue an animal that was injured and in pain and they bit you? Anybody seen something like that? I have. So human beings are the same way. When they're in pain, they tend to lash out and do things that they wouldn't do otherwise necessarily, but they're trying in some sort of way to cope with the pain. And so sometimes it's lashing out at other people, sometimes it's doing things to themselves, using drugs, for example. A lot of people start using drugs when they are in pain, and they continue using drugs, and so they end up in making bad decisions because of pain. Another primary or secondary reason is guilt and shame. And so I'm going to continue my story now with that chocolate cake. That 10, 15 minutes later, I finished that first piece, and now I'm feeling not so good. When was the last time I felt really good? When I was eating the chocolate cake. So I can go back and get another piece and feel good again. Like, I like feeling good, especially at 3:30 in the morning when I still got work to do. And so I go and I grab another piece of chocolate cake, and I tell the nurse, hey, that was wonderful. That was really good. I should get that recipe. And now I feel good again for a few minutes. And then what happens after that? And I feel bad again, and I want to feel good again, and there's still more chocolate cake. So sometimes people just eat the whole cake or the whole tub of ice cream, or sometimes you understand it's not just about chocolate cake, right? This is an illustration of all sorts of things that we do to try to make ourselves feel better. And it starts out as like, oh, I want some of that to feel good, and then it ends up with, I'm trapped in this cycle. And so psychologists would call that cycle addiction, theologians call it sin, but whatever you want to call it, it's the same cycle. All right, one more here. I'll put hidden motives, and we're not going to dig into this, but this would be in the realm of subconscious motives that people have. I know that's somewhat controversial. We're going to save that for another topic, another day, maybe. So, in our efforts to escape from shame and guilt, we attempt self-justification. Now, justify eating the chocolate cake because I've been working hard and I don't have time to go, and I can't leave to go out to the store. The cafeteria is closed and I'm hungry. And if I'm hungry and I'm not thinking clearly, I might make a mistake and do the wrong thing for a patient. So I should really have another piece of chocolate cake. Sound reasonable? Does anybody want to argue with me about it? I didn't think so. Because I can argue pretty well, right? And this is what we call self-justification. When we can start putting together arguments to justify our bad choices. And then what happens? If we try to justify ourselves long enough, it leads us into self-deception. All of your excuses for not doing the right thing, all of your excuses for why you can't exercise, or why you can't eat right, or why you can't go to church, or how come you whatever it may be, all those excuses are just lies that you tell yourself to try to justify yourself. And if you keep telling yourself enough lies, you're going to believe the lies, and you're going to deceive yourself into thinking that you did the best you could. And this is a human condition. It's not just you. It includes me. It includes all of us, human beings, and we do this. I'm going to put in a couple of quotes here from an author some of you may recognize. This is from the book Patriarchs and Prophets. The spirit of self-justification originated in the father of lies. We try to shield ourselves by casting blame upon others, upon circumstances, or upon God. I kind of butchered the quote a little bit, but the whole thing is in your handout, so you can go read the whole paragraph if you want. And then the next one, These are perilous times for the church of God. Do you believe that? Right now, perilous times in the world. And the greatest danger now is that of self-deception. So that's a big problem, our greatest danger. All right, let's back up just a little bit. We're going to talk about guilt. What is guilt? I'm going to suggest two things. Guilt is, first of all, a metaphysical reality that I've done something wrong. What else is guilt? There's another definition for guilt. Anyone want to hazard a guess? Guilt is also a feeling, isn't it? That's what we said earlier when we did something wrong, and then later we reflected on it, and then we feel guilty. So guilt is both a metaphysical reality and a feeling. And it turns out that the two do not always go together. And that causes all sorts of problems in this world. Sometimes people are guilty, but they don't feel guilty. Sometimes people don't. Sometimes people feel guilty, but they're not actually guilty. And either way is a problem. All right, so we're getting to what does this have to do with my choices? Well, I'm going to suggest that this feedback loop or addiction sin cycle is driven largely by guilt and shame. And that is one of the fundamental things that keeps us trapped in bad decision making. What's the best way to get free from that? Well, modern psychologists often will say, well, guilt is just a feeling, and you can just let that go, and don't feel guilty. There's really no absolute right or wrong. You shouldn't feel guilty. I actually had a patient come to me one time and told me, my psychologist told me not to feel guilty, but now I feel guilty because I feel guilty. Yeah, that's a real thing. It's a real thing. What's the actual solution for guilt? Forgiveness. Forgiveness is the actual solution for guilt. Because when we accept the forgiveness of God, it actually removes both the metaphysical reality and the feeling, and we can be released from having to fix that ourselves by doing something. We don't have to try to justify ourselves. Then we can look at the reality of where we are, and we can ask God to help us to be different. And so if I make the other choice, there we go. We talked about this, right? Oh, no, we didn't really talk about this. What if at 3 in the morning when I'm there and there's that chocolate cake and I decide, no, thank you. It looks lovely. I would love to have a piece of that, but right now is not a good time for me. Thank you very much. And I go on my way to do my work. That's kind of a hard thing to do, to say no to yourself when you're hungry and tired and sleep deprived and there's chocolate cake. It doesn't feel good. But 10 or 15 minutes later, how am I going to feel? I'm actually going to feel better because I feel at peace with that decision. I made the right decision. I'm actually maybe almost a little proud of myself that I made it past that temptation and I did the right thing for the right reason at the right time. So this lends itself to another feedback loop, which, for lack of a better term, we're going to call righteousness. And I know that's a theological term, but it really just means doing the right thing. So sin is doing the wrong thing and getting trapped into a repeated cycle of doing the wrong thing, and righteousness is just being in a cycle of doing the right thing at the right time. And that actually gives us a feeling of peace. So we have one other gap So there's 3 levels of change. The first level is actually not really a level of change because there's almost never any change there, and that's the cognitive. So for example, when people know that smoking is harmful, do they automatically quit smoking? Like every smoker almost in the world, at least in North America, knows that smoking's not good for you. But they do it anyway. And a lot of times that's true with us. We know that something is not right or that we should do something else, but we don't change. The emotional is a little bit different. When we become involved emotionally, we tend to change, but it creates a lot of turmoil. So for example, I've had this happen in a number of my patients. For example, this one gentleman, I believe it was his grandmother, had made him promise that he would quit smoking because she died. She was in the hospital dying from emphysema from smoking, and she made her grandson promise that he'd quit smoking. So he promised grandma, so he had to quit, but it was hard. Like he quit for a little while, and then he relapsed, and he tried quitting again, and it's back and forth, or sometimes people get emotional about it when, for example, they have a heart attack and they're in the hospital and they think, oh, what's the emotion? Fear. I don't want to die. I'm going to become a vegetarian. I'm going to quit smoking and I'm going to start training for marathons or whatever. They have all these things they're going to do, but then how long does that last when they get out of the hospital? A few weeks, 5, 6 weeks, and then they're back to eating junk and smoking again, and then they show up at the doctor and like, well, doc, I don't know, I just couldn't. So that's the emotional level. And the final level is identity. And that is where people actually change. When their self-identity changes, it changes their behaviors to match their new identity. Have you ever seen that? Somebody adopted a new identity and they radically changed a lot of things about themselves to match their new identity. Yeah, it happens. It happens. I've seen it many times. We see it sometimes. This happens a lot, like in middle school, high school age. People are still trying to figure out who they are. They get in with a new group of friends, and all of a sudden, they're gothic, or they're nerds, or they're jocks, or whatever group they identify as. They start orienting their whole life around that. Have you ever noticed that? I have. I've seen it. And it turns out that there's a lot of experience and research that shows us as if our identity changes, then our actions begin to change. And how that works is identity sits right here in between our thoughts, our feelings, our conscience, and our power of choice. And I'm just going to skip this one over here. There we go. Our identity. And I want to suggest to you that the best place to get an identity is through a connection with Jesus. You can do this purely at a secular level. You can get a new identity. You can choose, hey, I don't want to be the overworked soccer mom with 5 kids and no time to take care of myself. And you can decide that you're going to be an athlete. You can start training for an event. And some people do that. And it starts to change their identity. But fundamentally, what does it mean to be a Christian? What did Jesus say? You remember Jesus was talking to Nicodemus. He said, if you want to be in the kingdom, you must what? You must be born again. Paul said the same thing in Romans chapter 8. He said, it's Jesus that sets me free from this cycle because he's adopted me. He gives me a new identity as a son of God. If we follow God and we do his will, then he adopts us as members of his family. Now, when you become a member of the family of God, does that change the way that you behave? If you get adopted into a new family, well, yeah, this is the way we do things in this family, and your behavior begins to change. All right. Okay, here's a definition of our identity: core beliefs and feelings about who we are. It affects our view of the world, and it modulates our thoughts and feelings and defines our default behaviors. And I'm going to give you here this list. I would just say go read Romans chapter 8. Read the whole chapter. In fact, go back and read Romans chapter 7, the last half of the chapter, all the turmoil, and then read chapter 8, where Paul gets into the solution of being delivered from that turmoil, of being able to be set free to make better choices. Finally, at the end of chapter 8, Paul tells us that nothing can separate us from the love of God. So, we have in the handout, I didn't get this up on the slide. We have in the handout here on the next page under making better choices. You're going to see there a quote that says, it's highlighted down here, put your will on the side of Christ. I'm going to go back. Here. It's just a quick question. We all had the experience with the chocolate cake, and part of us saying eat it and the other part saying don't eat it. You know what else we have in our culture? We have a little caricature of the little good angel and the bad angel. Have you ever seen that? I don't think we actually need the good angel and the bad angel. We can have this own battle inside our own mind. But the reality is there is a devil and there is a God. And the devil is always appealing to us at this level, at the level of our flesh and our thoughts and our feelings to do things. And God is always appealing to us through the Spirit, through our conscience. So now we have this admonition, put your will on the side of Christ. And what happens is so often we're weak. Has anybody ever noticed that before? You make a New Year's resolution, you make some other kind of decision, I'm going to do this, I'm going to change this, and then you realize that you just don't follow through. What's the problem? Well, the problem is our willpower is still enslaved into that cycle, and it's when we can be set free from that cycle of shame and guilt and then trying to make ourselves feel better and engaging in more bad behaviors that only make us feel better momentarily but then lead to more shame and guilt. So if we put our will on the right side, we ask God to forgive us and to set us free from that cycle. It's then that He does that. He gives us the freedom, and that's what we read about there in Romans chapter 8. So there you have an explanation. And you can do all this whole explanation, this whole cycle, even if you don't believe in God and the devil, the psychology is still the same. You just have to figure out some way to deal with guilt on your own, which I've never really found a really effective way of doing that. But for those of us that understand and believe that God is with us and He is welcoming us into His family, then He'll give us new life and freedom. Now, if you want more on the identity part, there is the last slide here. There are two places you can go for a little bit more information specifically about the identity piece and processing through that. Oh, and it's on the handout here for you. There's this page that shows the tree, and then there's also the very last page with all these arrows on it. I'm not going to take the time to go through that now, but if you want to get more information on understanding that part of it and a process for developing a new identity, you can go to either Audioverse or YouTube, and there are QR codes in your handout that will take you right to the page where you can find those lectures. And so the Audioverse was recorded at Michigan Camp Meeting last summer. Myself and Dr. Easelton and Pastor Phil Mills did a seminar together, a week-long seminar. So there's a lot more information there. And then the YouTube video is at the Ukiah SDA Church from September 14 of 2024. And that's a church service, and I'll go into a lot more detail on that. So that's it for tonight. The power of choice, the power of the will. We have it. Are we going to use it? And I would appeal to you tonight to be intentional about putting your will on the side of what is right and good, putting your will on the side of Christ and what He's asking you to do. And you'll find that when you do that, He will actually give you more willpower and set your willpower free to do the job that it was made to do. So we're going to close with a prayer, and then we'll let you go for this evening. Heavenly Father, thank you, Lord, that you made us in such an amazing way. And also you've come to redeem us, to set us free from the sins and the addictions and the things that trap us into these cycles. Lord, tonight we ask that you would once again help us to recognize the truth, that you would help us to turn away from self-justification and self-deception, and believe the truth and allow you to set us free. And help us, Lord, that we would make better choices day by day. And we look forward to seeing what you will do in our lives as a result. And pray in Jesus' name, amen.